Chambers. Our next commencement is from Senator Curry.
Thank you, Laska Hirlock. Minister, this is about telecommunication masts in local communities, and I want to thank Councillor Ted Leddy, who came across a telecommunications mast that's going up in Castnock Village. When he was searching, he found it by accident when he was searching for something else, and he's now supporting the local community. There is major confusion amongst local communities about telecommunication masts. I'm not absolutely clear on the parameters by which they are considered exempted development. There is conflicting information in the media compared with my read of the regulations. And there's confusion because there seems to be absolutely no public consultation, even though these masts can be 15 or 20 metres high in prominent community locations. There's no site notice, no ad in the newspaper, no public submissions process. And even the local planning authorities don't seem to have a say anymore, as Bord Pleanála are overturning decisions. So I'm going to summarise some of the information I have, and you might clarify it for me. Under the Planning and Development Act 2000, all development, unless specifically exempted under the Act or associated regulations, requires planning permission. When I look at the Act under Section 4, it lists exempted development, but I don't see a reference to telecommunications. Under subsection 2, it says the Minister may, by regulations, provide for any class of development to be exempted development, and it lays out certain conditions. Are telecommunications covered by that? Under another Act, the Planning and Development Regulations 2001, Class 31 of Schedule 2, it provides that certain classes of development carried out to provide a telecommunication service are subject to exempted development. Is this the relevant legislation? And if so, I still do not understand what the conditions and size thresholds are. It does refer to overhead equipment. Poles carrying overhead wires shall not exceed 10 metres. In a previous parliamentary question, I found to another Oireachtas member, it said the legislative provision are supplemented by planning guidelines entitled Antennae and Support Structure Guidelines to Planning Authorities in 1996 and updated in 2012 with a circular letter. Under the guidelines, it says the height of these structures, when the requirements of the backbone network are taken into account, can range from 12 metres to 60 metres, though most typically they will be between 20 and 40. And also under the guidelines, it requires the local authorities to have a policy where special conditions would apply and for various reasons where installations would not be favoured, such as high amenity value, protected structures or sites beside schools. But then in the circular in 2012 it says, while the policies above are reasonable, there has however been a growing trend for the insertion of development plan policies and objectives specifying minimum distances between telecommunication structures from houses and schools, example up to 1 kilometre. Such distance requirements, without allowing for flexibility on a case-by-case basis, can make the identification of a site for new infrastructure very difficult. Planning authorities, therefore, should not include such separation distances, as they can inadvertently have a major impact on the rollout of a viable and effective telecommunications network. So, is it national policy that the location of telecommunication masts are to be made on a case-by-case basis under exempted development, so no public consultation for structures that can be up to 60 metres high, and even when they're refused, they can be overturned by Bord Pleanála? Minister, I don't think anyone could reasonably suggest telecommunications infrastructure is not of national and strategic importance, but surely there does have to be some parameters on where they can go.
Senator.
Thank you, Hirlock, and I thank Senator Emer Curry for raising this very important matter around the thresholds with which telecommunication masts are not considered exempt development and would require public consultation. And again, on behalf of Minister Berkeley, sends his apologies for being unable to be here today. The current exemptions from planning for telecommunications infrastructure and instances where planning permission is required is as follows. The Planning and Development Regulations 2001, as amended, provides an exemption from the requirement for planning permission for certain telecommunications infrastructure under Class 31 of Part 1 of Schedule 2 of the regulations. This allows for the deployment of specified telecommunications infrastructures by a statutory undertaker authorised to provide a telecommunications service without having to go through the planning process. Where the proposed telecommunications infrastructure is not being installed by a statutory undertaker authorised to do so, or where the size of the proposed infrastructure exceeds the limit set out in Class 31 of the regulations, such as greater than 12 metres in height for a telecommunications pole, full planning permission will be required. In this connection, it should be noted that the exemptions from planning do not apply in certain circumstances. Firstly, if the proposed location for the telecommunication infrastructure is in an area that requires an environmental impact assessment or an appropriate assessment to be undertaken before any works can commence, such as on a European designated site, the exemption under Class 31 of the regulations is disapplied under Section 4.4 of the Planning and Development Act of 2000 as amended, and planning permission for the proposed works must be sought. Secondly, if the proposed location for the telecommunications infrastructure would materially affect the character of a protected structure or any element of the structure which contributes to its special architectural, historical, archaeological, artistic, cultural, scientific, social or technical interest, the planning exemption under Class 31 of the regulations is disapplied under Section 57(1) of the Act, again with the result that planning permission must be sought before any works can commence. Where the proposed telecommunications infrastructure does not meet the requirements of the Class 31 exemption, or where the exemption is disapplied because of the provisions of the Act, an application for planning permission must, as I have outlined, be made to the relevant planning authority in accordance with Section 34 of the Act. The planning process prescribes a 5-week period from the date of the application for the making of submissions or observations by any person to the planning authority. Following the decision of a planning authority under Section 34 of the Act, an applicant for permission and any person who made the submissions or observations in writing in relation to the planning application to the planning authority in accordance with the permission regulations and on payment of the appropriate fee may, within 4 weeks of the planning authority's decision, appeal the decision to An Bord Pleanála in accordance with Section 37 of the Act. The appeals process in An Bord Pleanála includes a 4-week period for the making of submissions or observations by any person under Section 129 of the Act. In addition, the Board may, in its absolute discretion, under Section 134 of the Act, hold an oral hearing of an appeal. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Curry.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to have to go through this in detail, but I can tell you that the mast, the telecommunications mast in Castleknock is 15 metres. There's another one in Glaslock that was in the Sunday Independent last weekend at 19 metres. They were rejected by, they didn't go through the planning process. They went through Section 254s, so the public didn't know about them. The councils have said no. Well, and this is the case in Castleknock. It went through Section 254. The local authority rejected it, and An Bord Pleanála overturned it. So we have an issue here, and the location of that telecommunications mast in Castleknock is one of the most high footfall, prominent areas in the community that the Tidy Towns have spent the last 2 years trying to develop as a picturesque, to reflect the picturesque village. And the notion that a 15-metre mast would be put up without any kind of public consultation or the public being even aware of it is very worrisome. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerlach, and again thank Deputy Senator Eamon Curry for raising this very important matter. Obviously, I can't speak to any specific case because it would be inappropriate for me to do so, but what I can say is that where any person or body is unsure if planning permission is required for specific proposed telecommunications infrastructure, they may, on payment of the prescribed fee, submit a request in writing to the relevant planning authority seeking a declaration under Section 5 of the Act on whether the telecommunications infrastructure is or is not development or is not exempted development within the meaning of the Act. These provisions and arrangements as outlined in the Act and supplementary regulations are considered to be reasonable, balanced and proportionate in terms of enabling specified forms of development to proceed without having to undergo the full rigours of the planning system, while simultaneously ensuring that certain development proposals that exceed the exemption thresholds or which may have impacts on the environment or on protected structures are subject to the assessment under the planning process and involving public consultation with the right of appeal before any such development proposals are authorised to be progressed. Thank you.
Minister. Senator Boyne, you've been patiently waiting. You are
Next.
You are
Do
up.
you want me to rise?